Hi everyone, I'm Andy, and this is the AI Breakdown. Welcome to your weekly news edition, where I'll cover what happened in AI last week and why it matters. Let's start with Meta's big bet. On the 8th of April, Meta unveiled Muse Spark. It's the company's first proper frontier model release since the Llama 4S, and the first built under Meta Superintelligence Labs. That's the group Alexander Wang has been running since Meta bought a 49% stake in Scale AI for $14.3 billion and asked him to rebuild the effort from scratch. According to TechCrunch, Meta says the model was built over 9 months by a team Wang assembled after that deal. And to be fair, this does look like a comeback. Meta needed a credibility restoration moment. Muse Spark gives them one. It's a natively multimodal reasoning model, so it takes voice, text, and images, with text output for now. It also supports tool use, visual chain of thought reasoning, and a multi-agent feature Meta calls contemplating mode, which sounds slightly grandiose, but is basically their way of saying the model can break work into coordinated steps. On raw rankings, it's good, not dominant. Artificial analysis puts it fourth on its intelligence index at 52, behind Gemini 3.1 Pro and GPT 5.4 on 57, and Claude Opus 4.6 on 53. So no, Meta hasn't suddenly lapped the field, but the detail matters more than the headline number. There's one result that genuinely jumps out. On Healthbench Hard, Muse Spark scored 42.8, ahead of GPT 5.4 at 40.1 and more than double Gemini 3.1 Pro at 20.6. That's not a marginal win on a niche test. Meta worked with over 1,000 physicians to curate the training data, and it shows. On vision tasks, it's strong too, second only to Gemini on MMMU Pro, and ahead of everyone on chart reasoning. But coding is a different story. On Terminal Bench, Muse Spark scores 59, GPT 5.4 hits 75.1, Gemini 3.1 Pro sits at 68.5. That's a significant gap. And on ArcAGI 2, which tests abstract novel reasoning, the kind of problem solving that doesn't yield to pattern matching, Muse Spark scores 42.5 against mid-70s for both GPT 5.4 and Gemini. They're a generation behind, so the profile is clear. It's strong on health, strong on vision, competitive on scientific reasoning, and weak where developers care most. For Meta's actual audience, the billions of people on WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook, that trade-off probably makes sense. Nobody's using the Meta AI assistant to debug a Python repo. They're asking it about a rash, or scanning a nutrition label, or comparing products in a photo. And for that, Muse Spark is genuinely the best free option available. And that's the bit I think matters. Meta has distribution that nobody else can match. Around 3.3 billion people use its apps daily, and Muse Spark is free. It's going straight into the Meta AI app and Meta.ai first, with Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger, and Ray-Ban, Meta Glasses following in the coming weeks. So this isn't really a story about whether Meta has the number one model on paper. It's about whether a very good model, embedded everywhere, beats a slightly better model you have to go and seek out. That's why Meta's position looks stronger than the leaderboard suggests. But can making the model free really pay off? That's their big bet. They're wagering that AI boosts engagement, ad value, device sales, and retention, not API revenue. The healthcare angle is interesting too. If you're putting AI into glasses, wellness prompts, accessibility tools, or ambient assistance, strong health reasoning opens up a whole set of consumer touchpoints. Not diagnosis, obviously, but guidance, triage-style interactions, fitness, medication reminders, accessibility support. You can see the shape of the product strategy. The other thing worth clocking is that Muse Spark is a closed product. That's a real shift. Meta spent the last couple of years enjoying the halo of being the big lab flying the open model flag. This week, it joined everyone else in the proprietary camp. I get why. If you think model capability is becoming strategic again, you stop giving away the crown jewels. But it does tell you the mood has changed. Open is still useful. It's just not where Meta thinks the edge is anymore. This episode is sponsored by Notify Technology, a health and safety software partner, helping teams run incident management, audits and inspections, and risk assessments in one place. And with Notify Spark, their AI companion, They're streamlining incident reporting and investigations, saving time, reducing admin load, and helping teams act faster on what matters. Learn more at notifytechnology.com. That leads neatly to Anthropic, because while Meta is making a distribution claim, Anthropic is making an infrastructure claim. In the last week, Anthropic expanded its compute agreement with Google Cloud and Broadcom, locking in 3.5 gigawatts of Google TPU capacity due to come online in 2027. That's more than triple the 1 gigawatt arrangement they struck back in October last year. Now, gigawatts can sound a bit abstract, right up until you remember this is enough power to support one of the largest AI compute clusters ever assembled. So Anthropic is planning for industrial scale here. The timing matters as well. The deal landed as Anthropic said its annualized revenue run rate has hit $30 billion. That's up from $9 billion at the end of 2025, and ahead of OpenAI's reported $25 billion ARR. It also said more than 1,000 enterprise customers now spend over $1 million a year on Claude, up from 500 when it announced its Series G in February. And with roughly 80% of revenue is coming from enterprise. That last figure is the one I keep coming back to. Lots of AI companies can generate excitement. Fewer can build a high-retention, high-spend enterprise business that looks less like consumer subscription froth and more like proper software revenue. Anthropic appears to be doing exactly that. TechCrunch's take was that the Google and Broadcom partnership gives Anthropic a strategic advantage, and I think that's right. For enterprise buyers, reliability matters almost as much as model quality. Nobody wants to standardize on a vendor and then discover the real bottleneck is access to compute 6 months later. And there's a more subtle shift here. For a long time, the default narrative was that OpenAI was the giant and everyone else was trying to catch up. This week didn't exactly overturn that, but it did complicate it. If Anthropic has the stronger enterprise revenue mix, over 1,000 seven-figure customers, and a TPU pipeline measured in gigawatts, then the old picture of it as the thoughtful second player starts to look out of date. Anthropic is clearly building for procurement. Enterprise winners in AI probably won't be the companies that feel most culturally dominant. They'll be the ones that look safest to standardize on. Contracts, uptime, capacity, security, boring execution, it all matters. That said, I wouldn't pretend the questions disappear. A $30 billion run rate is not the same thing as effortless profitability. These systems still eat capital at an absurd rate, and some skeptics made that exact point this week, asking whether Anthropic can keep this growth rate up once compute commitments get this large. Once you're committing to infrastructure at this scale, you better keep the growth going. Otherwise, the economics get awkward very quickly. Still, if I were advising a large company choosing strategic AI partners right now, Anthropic would be one of the safest long-term bets on the board. That's quite a shift in a fairly short period of time. Moving from long-term plays to immediate concerns, there's the story that says a lot about where frontier AI competition is heading. A few weeks back, we covered Anthropic exposing large-scale Chinese distillation attempts against Claude. What's new now is that the situation has escalated from one company sounding the alarm to 3 of the biggest US labs coordinating a response. OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google have started actively sharing threat intelligence through the Frontier Model Forum to detect and counter adversarial distillation attacks. In plain English, that means if one of them sees a suspicious pattern of queries that looks like someone is systematically extracting outputs to train a rival model, it flags that pattern to the others. Bloomberg reported that 3 Chinese firms are the main actors being named here: DeepSeek, Moonshot AI, and MiniMax. Anthropic documented 16 million exchanges from those 3 firms alone, spread across roughly 24,000 fraudulent accounts. Bloomberg also said US officials estimate this kind of activity costs American labs billions a year. That's the bit that changes the tone. It represents a serious operational threat. What I find most interesting is what this does to the Frontier Model Forum itself. Up to now, it's often looked like one of those bodies that mainly exist to hold meetings, publish principles, and reassure policymakers. Useful, perhaps, but hardly thrilling. This week it started looking more like a cybersecurity information sharing network. That's a meaningful change. When direct competitors start exchanging attack patterns, you know they think the risk is bigger than the rivalry. There are a few implications here. First, it formalizes the AI race in much more explicit US versus China terms. That doesn't mean every Chinese AI company is doing this, and it definitely doesn't mean policy should turn into blunt force protectionism. But it does mean the major US labs are no longer treating distillation as a nuisance. They're treating it as part of national competitive infrastructure. Second, it raises questions about access. A coordinated defense effort is overdue. Honestly, I'm surprised it took this long, but once you build a threat intelligence framework, the temptation is always to widen the definition of threat, and some are concerned that the same framework could end up sweeping in legitimate researchers, not just bad faith actors. That's where auditors, researchers, and even heavy enterprise users can get caught in the dragnet if companies aren't careful. So my view is pretty balanced on this one. I think the labs are right to coordinate. If you're dealing with millions of fraudulent interactions across tens of thousands of fake accounts, this is a no-brainer. But I'd be wary of any next step that quietly turns security into an excuse for closing off scrutiny or throttling legitimate use. There's a line between defending intellectual property and over-policing access. They need to stay on the right side of it. Still thinking about platforms, Google has done something very Google this week. It's added persistent notebooks inside the Gemini app, with bidirectional sync back to NotebookLM. NotebookLM still exists as its own app, but the two now share a single workspace. Sources you add in one show up in the other. Google said the rollout started on April 8th on web for AI Ultra, Pro, and Plus subscribers, with mobile and free tier access due in the following weeks. So you can upload documents, keep context across sessions, organize research, then move between chat and source-grounded analysis without starting from scratch each time. This matters because Google isn't just stitching two products together for convenience. It's trying to turn Gemini from a chatbot into a proper research workspace. And the model underneath is genuinely strong. Gemini 3.1 Pro, which landed in February, leads on 13 of 16 major benchmarks. It scores 77% on Arc AGI2, which tests novel abstract reasoning, and 94% on GPQA Diamond for graduate-level science. It's not ahead everywhere. Claude Opus 4.6 still leads on enterprise-grade tasks and tool orchestration, and GPT 5.4 edges it on some coding benchmarks. But the point is, this is a top-tier model now sitting inside a persistent research environment with access to your docs, your email, your calendar, and NotebookLM's features like audio summaries, video overviews, and infographics. And if you're building in the second brain, AI notes, or personal research tool category, that combination is not great news. Few startups can match the depth of Google's product stack, and now the connective tissue between those products just got a lot tighter. The catch is that it launched for consumer AI subscribers first, not workspace business accounts. That's a miss, in my opinion. The people who most need persistent notebooks are lawyers, analysts, consultants, researchers, internal teams, in other words, work. So, workspace not being there on day one means the smartest version of the product is arriving first for the wrong audience. And there's a privacy angle that makes that gap worse. Under Google's standing consumer privacy policy, Gemini chats can be reviewed by humans and used for model training unless you turn off Gemini app's activity. And doing that also means losing your chat history. It's a trade-off that keeps the trust question alive for anyone handling sensitive material. Workspace accounts, by contrast, get a firm commitment from Google that data isn't used for training and isn't reviewed by humans outside the organization. So, the version of this product with the strongest privacy protections is the one that doesn't have notebooks yet. That's backwards. The other big reality check this week came from BCG on jobs. Their new analysis is about 50% to 55% of US jobs will be substantively reshaped by AI within 2 to 3 years, while about 10% to 15% could be fully replaced within 5 years. That's a large number, but the important distinction is reshaped versus replaced. Matthew Kropp at BCG put it plainly. What people do in these jobs will be different, even if the job is still there. And that tracks with what most firms are actually seeing. BCG also found that 46% of employees at AI-forward companies are worried about job security. That tells you how tense this already feels inside organizations. The BCG study also warns that companies cutting headcount too fast are already paying for it through lower productivity, lost institutional knowledge, and quietly hiring contractors to do the work the AI couldn't. That sits alongside the uglier Q1 layoff data, where 78,000 tech roles went and 48% were explicitly attributed to AI and automation, according to layoffs.fyi data cited by Tom's Hardware. But, and as I've covered before, my view is that a lot of companies are using AI to launder ordinary cost cutting. Even OpenAI's Sam Altman has said there's some AI washing going on, and Cognizant's Babak Hodjat was even blunter, saying AI can become the scapegoat from a financial perspective. If you're a leader, the practical rule should be simple. Don't cut a role because of the hype. Cut only after the workflow has held up in production with real error rates, real supervision costs, and real customer consequences. Anything else is just moving the mess around the org chart. Right, let's rattle through a few more before we wrap up. First, PwC has put a hard number on something a lot of us suspected. In its 2026 AI performance study, based on 1,217 senior executives across 25 sectors, roughly 75% of AI's economic gains are being captured by just 20% of companies. The interesting part is why the best performers aren't mainly using AI to cut costs. They're using it to find growth in adjacent markets and rethink the business model. So the gap isn't just about having more AI, it's about using it more ambitiously. Next, Anthropic launched Claude Managed Agents in public beta. This is hosted agent infrastructure that handles the messy bits like state management, tool orchestration, sandboxing, permissions, and recovery after outages. Pricing starts at 8 cents per session hour on top of model costs, which is cheap enough to make a lot of agent startups distinctly uncomfortable. If your whole business was basically making orchestration easier, this week was not a relaxing one. Also on Anthropic, Project Glasswing, an initiative that aims to secure software in the wake of advances in AI capabilities, has now gone fully live. This follows on from last week's episode where we covered Claude Mythos, the new model that Anthropic said was so powerful in cyber vulnerability work that it wasn't suitable for open release. Now there are 12 named launch partners in Project Glasswing, including AWS, Apple, Cisco, Google, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and JP Morgan Chase, plus access for more than 40 other organizations. Anthropic is putting up to $100 million in usage credits behind it, and says Mythos has already found thousands of high-severity vulnerabilities, including some in every major operating system and web browser. Taken together, these two moves tell you where Anthropic is headed. They're not just selling models anymore, they're selling the full production stack for running agents, and they're positioning themselves as a critical infrastructure partner for cybersecurity. The 8 cents per session hour price point undercuts a whole layer of the agent tooling ecosystem, and Glasswing puts them at the table with every major tech company on national security. It's a platform play and a policy play in the same week. Then there's Upwork turning up inside ChatGPT. Businesses can now scope a project in ChatGPT, get matched to freelancers from Upwork's marketplace, and draft the job post before handing off into Upwork for contracts and payment. That sounds mundane until you realize what it means. Commerce is starting in the chat window. Hiring is starting in the chat window. And once people get used to describing work conversationally instead of browsing marketplaces, a lot of digital funnels start to change. One final one that's worth watching. NIST is holding listening sessions this month on standards for AI agents in healthcare, finance, and education. This sits inside NIST's AI Agent Standards Initiative, which launched in February and has already closed 2 public comment periods, one on agent security threats, one on agent identity and authorization. They're also running a separate workstream on how existing identity and access management standards should apply to AI agents. That all sounds bureaucratic right up until you remember that NIST frameworks have a habit of becoming the benchmark that procurement teams and regulators treat as mandatory, especially in financial services and healthcare. If you're building agents that touch regulated industries, this is the quiet process that will eventually decide what compliant looks like. That's all for this week's AI Roundup. If you found value in this breakdown, please leave a rating and hit subscribe. See you next week.